Am I coming through? Yeah, okay. We usually have announcements and then a prayer, but if it's okay, I'm going to skip the announcements because we'll make them again right before before we have the climax of the service. And we're going to start our service with a prayer, and Dwayne Kaufman's going to lead us in that. Do a lesson, and we're into some pretty dry studying. It's the laws that's set down and the statutes in Exodus. So what I thought I would start out doing tonight, and I must read a little bit because my memory's not that good anymore, but I want to review and use some conjecture in the trip during the Exodus and get us out to where the law is given. Now, the Exodus, as far as they can date it, was between 1450 to 1401, if my memory serves me right. So that's spending, 40 years in the wilderness. But if you will, turn to Exodus, the 12th chapter, and beginning with the 31st verse down to the 41st. I'm going to review this picking up and leaving. Exodus means the going out, or the leaving. And so this describes it a little bit, and we want to look at a few things that happened there and conjecture a little bit what caused it. All right. During the night of the Passover of the Lord in Egypt, that he slew the firstborn of every family, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you've requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go. And also bless me." The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we'll all die. The Israelites did as Moses instructed them. These are pretty smart instructions. I overlooked it the first time through. He asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So they plundered the Egyptians. Plunder is just take what you want. Get out. The Israelites then journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. And here's another thing you'll miss. Many other people went up with them as well as large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. Now, the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. They were a very productive bunch of people in having big families, and they fared very well in Egypt. So after this 430 years, at the end of the 430, how many people you remember went down there? Yes, there were 66, not counting the wives of the men, and then there was Joseph and his two sons, and Jacob himself. So that makes 70. That's a pretty good production, and we're going to sort of extrapolate off that in a few minutes. At the end of the 430 years to the day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt. The Lord delivered the Israelites from the Egyptian army by passing through the Red Sea and then destroying the army by letting the sea flow back over it there. Now, at this point, the Lord, I think, this is my belief from study, that he intended to march up the short way to the promised land of Canaan. and fighting their battles for them, and to see that they get ensconced into this land of plenty that's been promised to them in Canaan, a land that was virtually, or as it were, flowing with milk and honey. That's about as good a way as you can describe a land, isn't it? Particularly in primitive times. But even this would have been a march of hardship for less than 3.5 million people. And I think that's a pretty conservative guess of how many people up and leave Egypt. Because you can take the you can take the 600,000 that's given here, and you can go to the book of Numbers. Numbers means, it takes its name from that. It's about the wanderings in the wilderness, and they take 2 census, or they number the people. One at the beginning, and the Lord requires these 2. He asks that they do this. He requires Moses to do it. And they come together, and they have this great census. And so the census at this time, just looking from the standpoint of being able to have those that can serve in the army. That's what the purpose is for, the military purpose. Those that can serve in the army. And by the way, this is in Exodus, Numbers, 1 through 119, okay? 1 through verses 1 through 19. That they take this census, and he gives the instructions for it. And at that time, in the first census, there were 603,550 fighting men. These, as he defines, are men over 20 that are, from there on up, that are able to serve in the army. Now, this is not including children, wives, and these additional people that came along. So I think at 600,000, 1,200,000 and a bunch of children, I think that you can easily reach the number of 3.5 million. Okay, here stands 3.5 million people, large baggage train, herding their herds and flocks of livestock along the way. This is if they take the shortcut. And remember, the Israelites left Egypt overburdened with wealth. And as to the battles displacing the inhabitants from their homes and lands, there are casualties, even with the Lord leading. There are casualties of death and being maimed for life. And they're taking a realistic look at this thing right now, I think. They're sitting out there in this terrible desert of sin. And with their flocks, their herds, and they couldn't eat these. They kept them for sacrifice. But they had to be watered and fed. So they're encumbered with all this in this journey. You can imagine if you went the short way, and even the Lord did the fighting for you, it's still going to be something very hard for them to do. And they're standing on this right inside the unforgiving desert, fresh out of bondage and slavery, which had been their lot for many years. They were not used to making hard decisions. Well, these were made for them by the Egyptians. Eventually, if you live this way, you will lose your ability of independent thinking. And so living in a vassal state, they become dependent on their masters. And this sinks them further into a servile state of being. No longer do they have confidence in themselves, nor the ability to function alone, much less to undertake something grand, as they stare blankly at what's before them. Initiative, boldness, and even trust is foreign to their thinking process. Along with even trust, it's foreign to their thinking process. Along with their ability to act and even for their own good. All right, after witnessing the miracles and the acts of power that the Lord has wrought in their presence, they can't now even muster enough faith and courage to trust even the Lord to deliver his promises. They cried for help, but were unable to accept it when it was offered. Now, this is the state of thinking they're in. And you can see they're scared. They're afraid to have any kind of initiative. And so I think that the Lord looks at it here, the case, he says, I've got to do some nation building. Now, I want to talk a little bit tonight about nation building. Now, psychologists have long observed that individuals, extend that also to nations, struggle mentally with what they call the eternal triad. Have you ever heard of that? Okay, this is basically what it is. It's a struggle among three salient points of value, and each is, in your mind, is struggling for supremacy. Do this, no, do this. And if you commit to one of these, at the exception of two, that's going to lead to disaster. And it means that what you must do, for sanity's sake and for wholesomeness, you've got to maintain a balance in this way of thinking. Now, I've written it on the board, and I'll try to turn it around. I find that I write worse on a board than I do even on paper. And I don't know if you've written on this board, but it moves all the time that you're writing on it. All right, can everybody see? I don't know. I don't know if you can read what I've got here. But here are the 3 points of that's in a struggle in our minds. Identity. I don't think I put enough T's in there, did I? Security and place. Now let's look at what each one is. Remember, this is the eternal triad. In identity, these are some of the things that's involved in identity. Self-awareness, self-importance and value, your morals, your ethics, your belief system, and your integrity. This is something you have to balance out. This makes your being, this is part of your being, is your identity. But also vying for attention here is security. Security is very important to everybody. You've got to be secure before you can even function. So here's what you look for security. Can everybody see? I'll move in a minute. This is security from physical harm. This could be invading forces. It could be somebody next door to you just beating on you or taking advantage of you. Also, it's security from plundering your possessions. Now, possessions are a large part of us, where we stand in the community, how we stand in our own mind, and how we rate ourselves, and how you live. And some of these, we acquire them, and some of them, we inherit them. But however you get them, you don't want them to be plundered from you or confiscated. And then there's protection that we also have here, security of our inalienable or legal rights. That's the right of, the Constitution pretty well lays that out, I think. The right for happiness and things like this, the pursuit of happiness. We've got the right to pursue, and that's what's important. The last thing goes by different names, but I've put place here. I think that pretty well stabilizes what. This involves territorial urges. I don't know, there was a book out many years ago. It was very good. It was Territorial Imperative. Many animals, and mankind himself is a territorial attached. He values territory. He'll stake it out. And most of you know your dogs know exactly where your territory is too. And probably our cats don't care. But anyway, many animals are territorial, and they'll guard this with their might there. And one of the things that's a little bit peculiar, and you've probably noticed this in your dog, while they're in the territory itself, they will defend it to the death. But if they go and encroach on somebody else's, that bravery that they've got charged to sinks the further they get away. And I think they've got a little case of guilt with them too, because a small dog can run them off sometimes, you know. But this is territorial imperative, and this influences our ways. I mean, you've heard people saying being wed to the land, love the land, and all this. Well, this is the territorial urge that's asserting itself. And this is place is also involved with belonging or home, a place where you have comfort, well-being, and experience prosperity. Now, these are the things that tug against you as you deal with life. Now, you don't study about this all the time, or you don't engage in it all the time, because you take vacations, or you're watching a sporting event, or you're doing something that you enjoy. You vacate from it, you know. But this is usually what wears you and makes you think at night, do I have enough security? How about my place? Am I ensconced there? Or how about my identity? Where do I rank in the community? I don't want to be on the low pole. I don't want to be a criminal. I don't want to be anything like this. So you value your identity. Does it make sense to you? Okay, this is something that's just inalienable in you. It comes forth. You worry about these things. Well, this is what they're struggling with at this point, and they don't really have the markers and the ability to deal with it, I think, at this time. Oh, okay, now, let's build a nation. We got a lot of scratch here, but we do have some things that are given. Thank goodness for that, so we don't have to invent that. How can a nation undertake to address and meet its needs? Well, first of all, you've got to have identity, and I've gone through that pretty good. The Israelites had identity, didn't they? They knew who they were. And also, if you're identifying just a group of people or a society of people, you've got to have identity even to that if you're going to form a country, a nation, and so forth. And a lot of times this is characterized by blood kin, as in the case of the Israelites. It started out with family. They said 66 souls there, 70. And they stayed there, and of course they married and intermarried and had prodigy, and so you developed here. You've got 3.5 million people there. That's all. They're all kin. They all recognize Abraham as the father when they do become a nation. And yet, it tells us something that they were able to get up 3.5 million people, say, up overnight and move out after eating the Passover feast. You know, they dressed up ready to go. They were ready to go there. But I dare say, with our cell phones and our ways of communication we have today, we couldn't get 3.5 million up and move out one night, could we? With good roads and automobiles. So they've got something going for them, and I think it's of a tribal nature. And they've kept communication. They all live in Goshen, and this is the Delta country down there. But they're able to get up, so they've got some kind of organization. And so here they are. We've got that going for us. Now, another thing a nation has got to have is territory. You've got to have a place. And not only do you have to have a place, you've got to be sovereign over that place. They don't have that yet, but it's promised. So we've got some goals there we need to keep. Now, there are different types of government, and even they were familiar with not all kinds, because some of them hadn't been developed. A democratic republic hadn't been developed at that time, nor had just a republic. You know what I mean by republic, all of you, a good definition, it's representative government. We are not a democracy per se, we're a democratic government, republic. Now, that means we're a democratic republic because we're able to elect our representatives. Can you imagine trying to govern and everybody has to go to the courthouse every day? That'd be an impossibility, wouldn't it? Even in a small nation, you couldn't do that. So we have to have representative government. And by choosing representatives and being able to take them out of office if they don't suit us, then we are a democracy that's a democratic republic, okay? They didn't know that. All they knew was they were quite familiar with kings and tyrants. They knew this. And, of course, a kingdom is usually made up of two types of people. You've got the royal people that govern, and everything belongs to the king. The law is made by the king. He has to be very careful not to get drunk, or he might say something where they'll be killed and he can't reverse it, you know. So he has to be very careful there. But the king is actually the owner of everything. And so the earls and the barons and all these, they do the farming and the collecting, and they have to raise up the army. And most of us, if we think back, we think, you hear all these good stories, and they lived happily ever after. Most of us would have not been in royalty. We wouldn't have lived in grand houses, because this is a very small percentage of people. We would live very roughly, probably in a sod house on the prairie. And we look back to those fond days of this period of time. We would have probably been a peasant, and you were locked into where you stayed. It was a caste system you could not break out of. And if you were a son, the first son went into the army. He belonged to the king. The second son went to the church, and he got an education. And the rest of them just was hard scrabble. These were tough times. So you've got to choose. Well, this is another choice they didn't have to make. They were a theocracy. And they remained a theocracy for a long time during the days of Moses. And a long time after that, you had a period of judges and so forth. They finally evolved into a kingship and maintained that until they were conquered. And then they were just a subjected nation that was, and we'll cover this a little bit more later, governed by the Sanhedrin. And we'll talk about what that is a little bit later. But we're trying to establish a government. So we're going to be a theocracy. Now, one thing that you've got to have in a government is you've got to have a constitution. This is a binding document that will hold you together. It explains why you should be together there, because you have mutual desires and goals and all these different things that you want to happen. Our Constitution is a very good Constitution. Now, it's not the Declaration of Independence. It just says, it declares we need to be a separate and different people here from what we're removing ourselves from, which is the King of England. But the Constitution, it states out how to govern. You got to set up laws. And we'll talk about some of the institutions in a few minutes that you've got to have to run a government. You can't do it with one man. You can't do it with just a plurality of people here. It takes a large administration to administrate a large bunch of people, you know. Now, a constitution, why this society of people should exist as a separate people, it needs to promulgate a system of law and order and a core system of principles for good and equitable governance. This is what a constitution states. Well, we've got that already. We've got the Ten Commandments and the covenant, haven't we? So there's a number of things here that's already established by God. Also, this Constitution must have an insistence on the establishment of the institutions that will and do promote, strengthen, stabilize, protect, and enhance the rights of the individual in the pursuit of life, liberty, dignity, prosperity, and happiness. And we'll name a few in the following. That's in our Constitution, but you know, we've left it now to the rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But do you know what the original said? The right to own land. And when you think about it, see, who owns the land in all these kingdoms and everything? The king. So they wanted to get away from that, and they wanted to rise up and raise up the individual. So you've got to make sure that he has standing so he can own land. Land's the only thing that gives you standing in a government. Now, this can also be transferred to monies and things like this, you know. But now I want to look at just what are some of the institutions that are required to have a nation. All right. The first institution is that of family. This is the building block of every nation on earth, is family. And if you've got a good, solid family with integrity, it will rear its children right, it will teach its children, and it will be concerned that they raise up and make good citizens and good children. What of our family today? Is divorce too easy? Is commitment too hard? How many people live together and don't get married? Well, they're married in the light side of the law anyway. It's called common law marriage. That used to be a shame, but not anymore. And if they live together and have several children, then they throw a big wedding, and then they can't get along as a rule. Because we're not raised on principles anymore. And most people do not go to church. And I'm sorry to say that Jerry, I check on what his statistics are sometimes, but he's probably very right when only about 7% of America are church-going regulars. And that's including the Catholics. So we're not really a godly nation anymore, are we? But this is, since there's one supreme God, and he's given us his will and what he expects out of us, and he's given us free moral agency, which only extends so far, we've got to make the right choices. And this is the great experiment that God gave us. You get to choose what you will do, where you will go, and how you will spend eternity. I won't put number 2 as church, or at least religion. Let's say religion. Because without this, you cannot have morals nor ethics, nor can you really have integrity, because you don't espouse right doing. The early economic people, the economist of 200 years ago, and namely Adam Smith, who wrote Wealth of Nations, and others, all said this, that a contract cannot exist, which all trade is, you know, and commerce involves contract, and banking, all this involves contracts. And if a person is not moral, if he's not ethical, he will not honor a contract in the long run. And I think that's beginning to show that he's right. The government tried to intercede in place of God, and it's not working out too well. So I'm going to put church next. And then we've got to have schools. Now, our schools used to be run on the local level, and the parents were able to take part in it. And I remember the PTAs used to be very strong, but they also helped select what books you read and what they wanted their children learning. But that's long gone now. Our school books, as I understand, is selected by the largest purchasers in the United States, and that happens to be California, and they've lost it, and it's gone to Texas now. New York originally did it. So look at these states, and that's what your school books are going to have in them. And of course, they're the big orderer, so everybody else gets to fall in behind them and buy them, you know. Now, this is what influences it. And it's not the 3 R's anymore that we're teaching. It's everything else but that. And I was talking to Bobby Brancer a few minutes ago, and we were bemoaning the fact that geography and history are now taught in social studies and as bylines. Now, how are you going to know where you go, what's going to be your outlook on the world or anything like this if you don't know geography? How will you ever read a map? How can you look at a globe and make any sense to you? Geography has to be taught separate. And so does history. History is not just about dates. You've got to have a chronology to it, but it's about events that influenced us and put us where we are. Now, these were actions usually of great battles, but there were also great inventions and great explorations, and many things have caused these events. Now, we look back, if we have a memory of this and we can reflect back on it, we see that mistakes were made. But we've got this to pull from, and we should be able to avoid them if we can see what happened there. But the old saying is, if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat all the mistakes that have been made in history. And usually that leaves, like old Israel, they'd be up serving the Lord, and then all of a sudden they'd fall in, back up. And it was just a yo-yo type of living there, you know. So these things have got to be taught. So you've got to have good schools. You've got to have a military. Now, I think they addressed this quite early here because they counted them right after the Numbers picks this up. When they get into the desert there, and this is they're very early on, it's the 2nd month, I think, that 2 years and a month is what the Numbers says. They took this census. And they began to organize. And just think the logistics of moving 3.5 million people across a desert country, blazing hot, no vegetation to mount anything, and yet you've got to feed. You've got to go from water hole to water hole, and it's going to take some pretty big water holes there. In fact, God had to use Moses to hit the rocks and create some of these, didn't he, to do this. But they've got to worry with this. But with all these things, he does take them up to they're almost to the point of going in a few months there, you know, certainly in a few years. 2 years or so, they come up to the border of the Promised Land. They come in from the east instead of going up from the west. And so they decide, well, we better spy this out before we undertake this organization. So you remember the 12 spies that went out. And only 2 came back with good reports. That's, oh, we can never overcome the giants. Oh, we can never take this land. It's a great land, but we can never take it. And so what? Pessimism usually wins out, doesn't it? Joshua and Caleb gave a good report. Said, oh, we can take this easy. And Caleb was, now remember, these are people that are what, 5'9", 5'8", 5'7". That's a big man at that time. And they go up against these guys that are, what, 10, 12 feet giants. And they're down around Philistia. And Caleb says, I'm not worried about the giants. Let me have that as my portion of land, and I'll take them on. Well, they had a lot of, they just couldn't handle that. So they wound up spending 40 years just winding around in the desert here, just wandering about. And that whole bunch dies off that's above 20. And so you've got a rugged bunch of kids that are used to this desert. They've been raised hard. And like our old veterans that were raised up in the 30s that fought World War II, that's all they knew was hard scrabble. That's a real word. You can look it up. It's a hard way of making a living. And they were what? They were noted as the greatest generation. Well, this is what they're breeding here, is the greatest generation. It's going to go in and conquer the land. Does it not sort of impress you with the numbers of people that inherited these rocky crags and all, and this spine down through Palestine there? They're great populations, and they had to defeat all these people and displace them in order to take them over. Now, these people warranted death. God said, you know, I meant to do this 400 years ago, and they've lived that long in sin and never going to change their ways. So they're under the ban. We're going to practice jihad here. Other things that you've got to have in a nation, you've got to have establish a very good court of law. It must be fair, it must be just, and it must be merciful at times. And you cannot have vigilante law, where you get all worked up and you might just hang the wrong people, and they often do a lot of times, you know. It's got to be well thought out. So a court system of jurisprudence has got to be set up to where there's fairness, there's all kinds of justice that can be meted out, and it can't be bribed or owned by somebody that lives there, a king or some mighty person, or you can't buy it. Even today, we have a lot of safeguards to our justice system, but still, you can get the best justice you can buy, is a saying, and it has some truth to it, doesn't it? You can't take on somebody bigger than yourself economically in court and come out. I've experienced that myself. Now, you've got to have departments. You've got to develop the country. You've got to have departments of roads and communications. You've got to have sanitation and health and all these things developed. You've got to have departments of commerce, because commerce it can't all be agriculture, but even agriculture involves commerce. You've got to trade. You've got to set up boards of trade. You've got to do all these things. And you also have to have a department of monies. You've got to establish a money. Medium of exchange is what money is. And you've got to set up an elaborate banking system. And I'm convinced myself, Bobby, that when they took this currency up, this offering up in Asia Minor and up in Corinth and those places, and we're going to take it down to Jerusalem to relieve the persecutions and the struggle they were having there. They nearly had to have a banking system where they could take a note. Have you ever tried to pick up coinage? Have you picked up a cigar box full of quarters? You can hardly carry it. Well, suppose you took a great big contribution down there. First of all, how would you carry it in robes? And the men would take it. It'd take a whole division of people to go down there, and the brigands would jump right on them, wouldn't they? So I think what they mainly just took a note, and it was changed into the banking system. I think the Romans had a banking system that good at that time. Okay, let's see. And you've got to have police. This is outside the military. You've got to have police and law enforcement. These are just, there are more you can add to it, but these are the essentials to start out as a nation. Now, let's look at the jurisprudence in Israel at this time. It's mainly God is the executive, God is the legislative, and God is the enforcer at times. He's working through Moses, but as the system of justice evolved, and we find at the day of Christ, you had what was called the Great Sanhedrin. Now, I'll try to look up the base of the word and what brought it about, but I don't think it really has something unless they pull it out of ancient names and so forth to apply it. But it is the jurisdictional authority of the Great Sanhedrin, embraced all the phases and functions of government, religion, and education. This is all done through this court system, legislature type of affair there. Unlike the American system of government, with its independent legislative and executive and judicial departments, the powers of the Supreme Tribunal of the Hebrews were legislative, executive, and judicial. And it truly was the Hebrews' high court of justice. Before this august court, Jesus Christ was tried and found guilty. Now, we're not going to be able to get into it. I'd like to sometime is talk about how very careful they were to serve justice. And they had some very rigid rules that they had to go by. They couldn't hold court at night. They couldn't start court until after the daily prayer or sacrifice. So it had to happen during the daytime. It had to be in the open. And it had to be where it could be viewed and known by the public. They didn't even use lawyers in the defense case then. And it goes on and on. And when it came to the people that were settling the case, they did it by ballot. They would vote. So they don't know how you voted, you know. But they started with the youngest member on the court first, so he wouldn't be persuaded by the older members who'd been there a long time. It's more opinionated, you know. And they took all kinds of ways of doing and exercising justice. And here comes Christ, tried at night. And they take care not to have any kind of false witnesses. Oh, that's terrible. You have to suffer the thing yourself, and you cannot suborn yourself either. And it was all done before professionals, more or less. Now, we pick out juries from what's supposed to be our equals. That's rarely the case, isn't it? Once you get to serve on there. In fact, we've had to cut our juries back to 6 people mainly now, and a few people that can fill in. That's how hard it is to serve justice anymore. But it would have been impossible to try Christ and find him guilty had they observed all the strict regulations that normally kept in the law. He's completely innocent, and he should have been found. But that's not the way it went. And I guess it was foreordained. He had to die anyway for our sins, didn't he? Well, I meant to go further than this, but maybe next time, if you'll look in the 21st chapter, this is called, there's 2 branches of law. There is the Pentateuch, and that's the first 5 books, or the books of Moses, and he gives laws through here. This is statute law. It's laid down in statutes and ordinances. So this is the base law of Israel. But there's also the Talmud, and this is more or less case law. You know, familiar what case law is. You see all these books behind the lawyer's office there? This is case law. It's cases tried throughout the land, and see how they applied the laws to what these cases were, and then you draw off this to help you govern or try cases there. So case law is supposed to be filtered through the Constitution, but it's not anymore. You have to go up through the federal courts to do that, and a lot of times it'll find its way up there. But these are 2 laws that's commonly administered in the land here. So if you read through this, verse 21 deals with capital punishment a lot. There are several capital punishments there, things that deserved being stoned to death. This is the way they executed in Israel. They stoned to death. Then they had corporal law. Now, I want you to think one thing before we quit. Here they are strung out in this desert for 40 years. Now, how are you going to have any kind of institutions? How are you going to have court? And you know there's disputes, bad tempers and everything. We're trying to get these animals move along, or somebody gets to the water trough and you've drawn it, you know. All these things, it has to be dealt with. And it's more than Moses could deal with. But usually, after they managed it somehow, but when they did get into the promised land, they set up all these institutions. Now, the synagogue didn't come along. We don't know for sure when the synagogue came along, but it was probably after they served time in Babylon. And they liked it so well down in Babylon, most of them didn't want to come back home. And it was just a period of 70 years. They were in slavery there. But they did finally come back, and there were three great groups of Jewish people at the time of Christ. Those who still lived in Babylon, those that had made it back to Jerusalem, and then there was Alexander. These were the elite people that lived down there where the great library is that everybody wants to go back and see what they had in it. So zealous were the people at this library in Alexander and it was a great docking area. It was a great port. Ships would come in, they'd go down and commandeer the books they had, go back and copy them, and then take them back down and give it to them. And this is where he acquired all types of knowledge, and it was divided up into 7 different kinds, medical and different things, military and so forth. Okay, thank you for your attention. I appreciate it tonight. Jerry will catch us up next week, I hope.
think it's about time to get started. I decided to put on the mic for the couple minutes that I have that I'm speaking to you guys. I guess technically I didn't really need it. But just some few announcements that we have. We have people on our prayer list that we need to remember. Kenny Carter, nephew of Sue Birdwell, Dorothy Metter. Let's keep them two in our prayers. So we have a long list of people to remember, but you can refer to the bulletin for those. We also have some new ones. Is it Teresa? Is that what you said? Theresa Schaus. Do you remember? I'm sorry, I can't read, but okay. Okay, so let's keep Theresa Schaus and the Schaus family in our prayers. If you didn't hear what Bobby said, she had her leg amputated due to infection, but she's doing well. But we need to keep that family and her in our prayers. Is there anyone else that we need to remember in our prayers that I did not say? That's an update, maybe. Anyone? No? Okay. All right, so upcoming events. We have a lot of things going on coming up. Please do not forget life group meetings, April 8th, following our evening services. We also, the Red Cross, American Red Cross Bloodmobile will be here April 9th from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. in the Fellowship Hall. And then also our men's prayer breakfast, April 14th at 8 a.m. In the Fellowship Hall. The sign-up list is posted in the foyer. So if you're a male and you want to go to the men's prayer breakfast, that includes our young people as well. If you all want to come to it on when did I say April 14th, go please sign up on the sign-up sheet in the foyer. Meal ministry is April 19th. If you have never helped with the meal ministry, I would like to encourage you to go do it. It's a great work. You will meet up here at 8 o'clock in the morning. Is that correct, Don? 8 o'clock in the morning for meal ministry? You'll meet up here at 8 o'clock in the morning to help cook, prepare meal. 8:30. If you can come, just I guess whenever you're available in the morning, to help cook, prepare things, and then you pass out the foods to those who are in need. It'd be a great thing. It's a great thing that we're doing. Don't forget our gospel meeting is coming up. A gospel meeting. It's April 22nd through the 25th. Brian McAllister is coming, and he's speaking to us on a fantastic series that he's prepared. And so please mark that day on your calendar and plan to come out. I think it's going to be a fantastic week. A great chance for us as Christians to learn more about God and how we as Christians should act and be, and kind of maybe see a more in-depth study in the Bible. Last announcement. I know, I have a lot, but youth announcement. Our spring break kind of is getting rained out a little bit. As you can tell, it's rained a lot this week, so we've had to cancel a lot of events. If you have a kid who's going to the Nashville Disaster Relief, Church of Christ Disaster Relief tomorrow, we had to cancel it because yesterday I received a phone call. They don't need our help. They've had a lot of help come in the past couple weeks, and they just don't need any help. So we're canceling that, and we'll make it up at another time. We're going to postpone it. But the great thing is next week, April 13th through the 15th, is our youth spring retreat. So if you have a youth who is interested in going on this retreat, please sign up. I need to know ASAP if you're willing to go. And then finally, we are going to be going next week. The movie theater here in town is playing I Can Only Imagine. And so we are going to try to plan and take some of our families and some of the church members. So if you want to go see the movie I Can Only Imagine next week on Monday, that's the day that we're going to go. It's $3 to go because it's family night. Please sign up on the sign-up sheet that's out in the foyer on the youth board because we have to let them know Monday morning how many tickets we're buying. So if you want to go see this movie with us, please go sign up on the sign-up sheet so we can know how many tickets to buy. It is Monday, Monday night at 7 o'clock is when the movie is showing. So please, if you can, go sign up for that. If you have a songbook, go ahead and mark in your songbooks to page number 458, 458. That is the invitation song. And Brother Mike Holland will be coming and giving us his lesson. Oh. Do you know your friend's name? Terry Shin. I stole Mary Lou's paper, so Terry Shin. S-H-I-N-T. 2 N's. Okay. Yes.
The movie that's up there next Monday, I know some people here saying this will be my third time watching it. Most of my kids have seen it 2 times at least. This will be their third time watching it too. It's probably the best $3 you spend all year long to watch any kind of movie. I've tried both times I've watched it, and I'm a very big grown man, so both my daughters they watched it, but it's not. You're not crying because of sadness. You're crying because of the change you see in this movie. So it'll be the best $3 you spend. So if you want to go and you'll be with all with fellow Christians. So both times we went and watched it, at the end of the movie, everybody in the place sits there and just cheers and claps their hands and all that stuff. So it's by far, the best family entertainment. I know in the world we're not getting much good family entertainment. This is by far the best one in a while. Okay.
So we'd like to encourage everyone to go if you're able Monday night. Please sign up, and it's $3 per person, and you can just pay us whenever we give you your ticket. And so, anything else? Nope. Okay.
This is good. I think I got 2 minutes. And I don't have a microphone. I think I need it. At church, at work, in a club you might be a member of, on the ball team that you might be on. The only way that anything ever gets done is if somebody does it. Somebody has to get it done. Imagine the Tennessee Titans playing football. Centers the ball to the quarterback. Quarterback hands the ball off to the running back. The offensive line knocks a big hole. And as they're knocking the hole, the running back fumbles the ball. And as he fumbles it, he falls. The offensive line stands and watches the ball dribble on the ground, and they look and say, I'm not picking it up. Well, what happened to that team? You're right, they wouldn't win. They wouldn't go anywhere. Not only that, the people that did that would be hard. Turn your Bibles to Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 through 2. Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourself, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in the same way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. Nevertheless, the one who receives instruction in the word should share all good things with their instruction. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Who sows to the Spirit from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have And in my study guide, it describes the word sin as being translated from a Greek word, I'll try to say it, hamartia, or something like that. And it says that that word actually was a word that means somebody had shot an arrow and missed the target. Study guide man says, sin is the failure to hit the target of life. And referring back to my football story, I describe it as someone who has fumbled the ball in the game of life. Verse 1 is about a person that has fumbled the ball in the game of life. And it's telling us there that someone, if we're a Christian, will not step back and say, I didn't fumble it, I'm not doing anything. We should be ready to do it. We should be ready to pick up someone's fumble. And not only pick up the fumble, we should pick it up and be gentle and tenderly with that person that has fumbled the ball. And in the last verse in chapter 10, it tells us not only should we be ready to help someone carry the ball, but if you can hear my voice here tonight, you're part of the people that we're describing here, especially those that are a family of believers. And everyone here should be ready to help somebody carry the ball. So if you're here tonight and not a Christian and wish to be, or if you're here and you drop your ball and need help, would you come and we sing this song?
Rock of Ages, clap for me.
Thank you guys for coming out. Next Sunday, we're going to finish up, again this Sunday, really. We're going to be finishing up my series on the Hokey Pokey. So come on out, and we'll finish that Sunday morning. Is there anything that I missed earlier? No? Okay, if we, Clay, get Barry, hit on closing down. Let's pray together.